Ezra Klein. He's also an MSNBC policy analyst. Anthea Butler, professor of religious studies and graduate chair of religion at the University of Pennsylvania. Maria Teresa Kumar, the CEO and president of Voto Latina, and Edwina Rogers, the executive director of the Secular Coalition for America and former economic advisor to President George W. Bush. Thank you all for being here this morning.
Thank you.
So, Edward, what do you make of this? Is this the president really doing a policy move where he says, okay, the only way that ACA is going to work is if we get everybody signed up? Or is this an actual political move? I'm going straight in your face with my Obamacare. Bring it.
Here's what I make of it. I'm ecstatic we get to argue about the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for years to get back to this point. I thought something the president said in those remarks is really the thing to focus on, where he said, in the states that are trying to implement this correctly, we're seeing it work. And that is true. Oregon, Washington, California, Maryland, we're seeing really good things there. What is going to be, I think, the foundational point to think about in the ACA over the next year and coming into the midterms, we tend to think of policies either working or not working, right? Either we do it and it's good, or we do it and it's bad. It's just binary. That is not how the Affordable Care Act is going to go. Every state sets up its own exchange, either because they do it or the feds do it on their behalf. And every state can fail or succeed on its own. And so you can have a situation where a state like California, where Jerry Brown, Arnold Schwarzenegger, in fact, was the first governor in the entire nation to begin setting up his exchanges, outreach program. They're getting people in. They're getting the word out. They're seeing premiums come down. It could work really well in California. And then over in Texas, Rick Perry is doing everything he can to stop it. The Medicaid expansion isn't going to go into effect at all. And so the big, I think, question about the Affordable Care Act going into 2014, if it works great in the states that are trying to make it work great, and it is a disaster in the states that are trying to make it a disaster, does the fact that Governor Perry has destroyed his state's health care system in order to spite Obama, does that make Barack Obama look bad, or does that make Republicans in Texas look bad, and in particular Hispanics in Texas want to get the Medicaid expansion they could get if they just got Perry and a couple Republican legislators?
So who gets held accountable here?
Well, not only who gets held accountable, but it's also very political. The reason he's going into California is that they have so many Latinos that are getting ready to be lined up. The Affordable Care Act, in order for it to work, needs at least 2.7 million young people in its roles. Latino population is 14 years younger than the average American. But then there's another strategic position there. There are 2 Republican seats in the Central Valley. They're up for grabs. You know who's eligible voters now that weren't even 4 years ago? Latinos.
And particularly these young Latinos.
Young Latinos. So he is definitely trying to tout the Affordable Care Act, but it's because it's purely political. He needs to start getting congressional members stacked in as fast as possible, and he knows that California, the Central Valley, that no one ever pays attention to because it's historically Republican, is there. Now he needs to go to Texas, because Texas has the largest population of eligible Latino folks, and he goes toe-to-toe with Rick Perry, and at the minimum, he's able to tell them, look, I care about you. You guys need insurance. You guys are young, and you're going to basically help carry this forward.
Now, Edwina, part of what's fascinating about this to me is that, we see this notion that people are against the Affordable Care Act, against Obamacare. When we break it down, it turns out some people are against it because they think it's too liberal, but there's also a whole group of people who are against it because they think that it's actually not liberal enough, that it's not progressive enough. In a lot of ways, if we were to start doing what Ezra says and we start breaking down the Affordable Care Act, this is a set of power initially put forward by Republican lawmakers, some of whom now are the ones voting against 37 times against the ACA.
I agree. I worked in the Senate years ago, 2003 and 2004, for Senator Sessions on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee under Bill Frez. And I would say 80% of what is in the Affordable Care Act, the Republicans in the Senate wanted. The Medicaid expansion was a little bit uneasy. The individual mandate, everybody knew that it was required to make it work. And so I've been close to health care policy for more than 10 years, and I know that it's a step in the right direction. But it's so confusing. It's so hard to understand and comprehend for the average American, but I know that the president's doing the right thing, and he's got to get out and educate people. And I think he's just had it. He's had it. He's worked so hard. He finally delivered what the country needed, and so there's not this gratitude out there, and people don't really understand it, but they will in the end.
And almost even a lack of celebration. I think part of what's so surprising to me is this idea that now it's passed. Now it's been upheld by the Supreme Court. It certainly has its limitations, but we were, in fact, as a country, working for some multiple decades to get some sort of health care reform, and now the president almost almost has to go on and say, hey, for 30 years you said you wanted this, we've got it, come on, get on my side on this.
Exactly, and this is now the resell of the Affordable Care Act. It's this say where I'm going to get out front, the president, and now say, look, this is going to be good for everyone. And I think especially, you brought up Texas and Rick Perry, I think that this is a moment to drive the stake through all these states that don't want to do this and have gutted their health care systems. In Texas, you don't have birth control. Planned Parenthood has been gutted. All this funding has been gutted. These are the same people who are going to need health care. They need it desperately. And one of the things I'm personally worried about right now, especially with young people, is that there's been a lot of this talk and backlash about how it's going to be, and we just should pay the fine instead of getting health care insurance. But I think this is a moment to really promote the plan and say, you really need to try to buy into this, because this is going to help you in the long term. It's also going to help the plan, and that's the important piece.
We're going to take a break, but as when we come back, I want to ask you about rational self-interest, both at the individual level, but also at the level of governors and the choices that they're making. Because up next, some of the president's most surprising allies. You are really not going to believe who is supporting the Affordable Care Act right now. Swagger.
All I do is win, 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 no matter what. Got money on my mind, I can never get enough. And every time I step up in the...
Welcome back. We've been talking about the president's swagger on display this week, and the Democratic Party's risky political calculation to make the president's health care law a centerpiece of this year's midterm election. But Democrats have underestimated the intensity of opposition to the law before. Look at the Medicaid provision. Who would have expected states to refuse to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act when, after all, it's such a good deal for them? The federal government splits the cost of Medicaid with each state. Usually, the feds pick up between 50 and 85% of the bill. But the ACA expansion is different. The federal government will pay 100% of the cost for the expanded population for the first 3 years. And after that, no less than 90%. So it's a great deal for the states. They get billions of federal dollars for a program that consistently takes up a big and often the biggest chunk of state budgets. And yet, many Republican state lawmakers are refusing to expand Medicaid because it is part of the hated ACA. I'm looking at you, Bobby Jindal. 15 governors say they will flat out refuse to expand Medicaid. That's the states in red. Other states are weighing their options. Those are in yellow, and in the rest, in green, the governors support expanding Medicaid. But some Republican governors just can't say no to the money and are, get this, aggressively supporting a Medicaid expansion. And that's led to some serious infighting among Republicans. In Arizona, I can't believe I'm about to tell you this, Governor Jan Brewer, no fan of the ACA, has made good on her threat to veto any legislation sent her way until the State House passes a budget, including a Medicaid expansion. In Ohio, Governor John Kasich has gone so far as to invoke the name of Ronald Reagan in a recent op-ed in USA Today. In Florida, Rick Scott has asked his legislature to expand Medicaid, but they refused. And in Michigan, Governor Rick Snyder is begging his legislature to pass a bill expanding Medicaid before they leave for the summer. Ezra, is this just rational self-interest? Just this economic self-interest?
The feds are wanting another thing. Here is a bag. We brought this giant bag, and behind us a truck of free money for you. Free money. Would you like any of it? There was a RAND study. It came out earlier this week, and they looked at the 14 Republican states that are looking to not do it. They calculated that those states would lose $8 billion, and this is actually a really important part of this. They would have to spend an extra $1 billion above what they would normally do for uncompensated care. So that is going to really hurt their health care system. It's not just that they're saying no to free money. They're putting an extra burden on their systems because Medicaid is paying for a lot of hospitals right now that treat the uninsured. They're not going to get that payment anymore if they're sending Medicaid back, or at least sending the expansion back. So they're going to have a lot of those hospitals closing. Their system is going to get worse. 3.6 or 3.9 million more people be uninsured. They are refusing. They're not just refusing free money. They are actively hurting their system. And that's why you see Jan Brewer and Rick Scott and others making such a priority of this, because they don't want to deal with the consequences.
And not just their health care system, right? Their economy, right? So, so Medicaid dollars also are economy expansive, right? They're real dollars. They generate jobs.
Well, and also Arizona and Florida, let's not forget, they're large retirement communities. They're voters. So when you start looking at it through that lens, of course they're not going to want to upset their base. So I think that's one of the other reasons why they're so up in front, whereas other states are kind of encroaching because, again, they're not retirement communities.
So what am I to make, then, of this now internecine war, I mean, between Republican governors, some like mine, Bobby Jindal, who's taken the hard-nosed stance, we may be a poor state, we may have lots of people who need this Medicaid expansion, but nope, hands off Obamacare, versus people who do seem to be acting in the economic, rational self-interest of their constituents?
Well, I think that most Republican governors will eventually be coming around, and the ones where the big retirement communities are, like in Arizona and Florida, the majority of Medicaid dollars are for retirees and for the elderly, mainly for assisted living and for long-term care.
So is this the difference? Is it because the elderly are not, there's not that same sense of problematic taking of government dollars that we often see when we talk about poor people, African-American communities, you know, Latinos? Those dollars get sort of politicized in a way that dollars for the elderly do not.
Right.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, let's not forget that when they were doing oppression laws in Florida, they went actively, the Republican Party went actively to assisted living facilities to register them, because they realized that let's carve this out, but they are voters and they're the ones, they aren't takers. They've already basically have given back to the system. And who is their base?
And talk to me a little bit more about the connection between ACA as a policy and the potential of Latino voters within the midterms to help shift it. You talked a little bit about it in that corridor in California, but is this in part also about not wanting to lose Latino voters?
Well, absolutely. Well, one is California's done something very interesting, actually. In order for you to basically sign up to exchange, they also provide you with the opportunity to sign up and register to vote. California has now actually allowed you to go online and you, from your safety of your home, directly register and vote. And those individuals actually get on, 80% of them get on the voter rolls, and they actually turn out. So if they do that and make that the law of the land, it's a new motor voter law. And you facilitate it, but you also get individuals that may not likely have been asked to register and participate.
That said, though, I got to say, when I'm looking at this pie chart, and we've asked people how people think their families are going to fare under ACA, and 38% of them are saying we think our families are going to be worse off, 19% saying better off, and 39% saying no difference at all. When you look at that, why would you make that the centerpiece of, I mean, is there any way to win a midterm election based on this?
Well, I don't think anybody's going to win the midterm election based just off of the Affordable Care Act. But as a broad point, one, the answer is for most families, you're not going to notice. For a bunch of families, you'll be better off. And then for a small minority of families, maybe you'll be a bit worse off. If you're rich, you're going to be paying higher taxes under the Affordable Care Act in order to pay for poor care. One point I want to make on the issue of Hispanic voters, though, there's a really interesting way in which Obamacare is becoming tied in with immigration reform. In that, in the House, what is blowing up the bipartisan immigration bill there is that House Republicans want to lock anybody who's moving from undocumented to trying to get onto the path to citizenship out of any federal health care subsidies, particularly Obamacare. So let's say that you are making 400% of the poverty line. You are not eligible to get the subsidies everybody else in the country can get. I believe Marco Rubio came out either last night or this morning on one of the shows and said, yeah, he agrees with that, and that could blow up the Senate bill, too. So now you have a possibility where the way Republicans are actually blow up immigration is, in addition to blowing up immigration reform, the way they are going to blow it up is to say that immigrants should not be able to get Affordable Care Act subsidies. So you're going to have, it's not just that you have this happening in states with a particularly heavy Latino population, which is particularly uninsured. It's also going to be
if there's a chance to back out
of immigration reform. That doesn't seem like great long-term politics for the Republican Party.
No, it's not. It's just not long-term. It's not great long-term policies, because we need more people to pay in than not, right? So to keep affordable health care going. But I also think the thing that's going to happen is that it's not just the elderly that this is going to backfire. It's going to backfire on people who are middle-aged, 45 to 65, who are actually taking care of elderly parents, and they won't have this money if, in some of these states that don't want to, help out. And all of this is going to really fall apart. And so the squeeze is going to be not just a population that's 60 and over, but a population that's maybe 45 and older.
The sandwich.
So, the sandwich. Yeah.
I also wonder about this decision that the Republicans made at some point to label ACA as Obamacare, with the sense that Obama was going to be radioactive. But when you look at his approval numbers, despite all the so-called scandals, all the kind of going into scandals, his approval numbers have remained pretty standard, sort of half and half in our polls over and over again, no matter what is coming out. And it does feel like almost labeling it Obamacare might allow then his position, kind of going out there and rallying for it, to bring up the numbers of ACA. Any possibility of that?
I think in the end, the popularity of this law will be built on how well it works. And I think mainly what's going to happen is it's going to come in, most people aren't going to notice, and then a few people are going to be really hugely helped. But I think the big context for what they're doing, a lot of Democrats for a long time have said, why is the administration letting this law? Why are they not out there every day? And the administration's answer is what they looked into, when they looked into this, what they found was to sell the law, to go out and tell people about how it's going to work before they can actually begin signing up, is to waste your opportunity. Because then they get mad, they try to go online, they try to sign up. They can't get any subsidies. So this summer, because they're coming into the fall and the exchanges activate in October, this is when this is all going to ramp up. And I think to the administration, they really see this will be a popular law and good politics if it works. And in order for it to work, people need to know about it. They need to sign up. And for that to happen, they need to time the salesmanship right.
Right.
And so I think it's really about this coming summer, because that's going to be what drives actually how the law works in 2014.
I love this. The other big the other big presidential play this week was a judicial play. And when you talk about swagger, three all in one day. I loved it. About the president's plan to nominate 3 judges to the D.C. Circuit Court all at once. It's a dare, daring Republicans to block them all. And he did, indeed, nominate 3 judges this week: Patricia Millett, Nina Pillard, and Robert Wilkins. Take a little look at this image. Do you notice anything? Yep. He's not just filling the court, he is diversifying it too. Swagger! All right, so I am fascinated by this decision. This president has had a tough time getting all of his judicial nominations through. So this time, this extremely important court, he puts forward 3 nominations. I assume because then you can't filibuster all 3 at the same time?
Yeah, you can't filibuster all 3 at the same time, first of all. Second, it gets away from all the arguments right now about you don't have enough women, you don't have enough minorities, you don't have this, you don't have that. So it satisfies, his base, but it also puts it right in the face of Republicans and say, do this, just come at me on this. And if you come at me, you are going to get it, and you're going to get it hard. And this is the first time I thought when he did the nominations, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, finally, this is what I wanted you to say for the last 5 years. I wanted you to get in their face and, really challenge them.
It's interesting you say that, because I wonder if part of what we've seen this week, because it was a tough week for the president in certain ways, right? And I promise for everybody who's irritated that I'm not talking about all the, the Verizon stuff. That's tomorrow. We got 2 shows, right? So we're going to talk about what a tough week it's been for the president in a lot of ways. But that's been part of what is so interesting about how aggressive he's been, to put 3 names forward for the court all together like this with a kind of dare, and to have them all be non-white men, struck me as exactly what much of the base has wanted, a kind of more aggressive president.
Well, and let's not remember the district court that he chose was D.C., and these are individuals basically that feed a lot of the stuff goes into the Supreme Court. So it actually provides a base for him to be legacy building in the long term. So I think that's incredibly important. But I think these are definitely they're good wins in the time that he needs them, but he needs bigger wins right now. And it's a matter of how do we actually start getting back on his agenda so he can be true legacy. We talked about Obamacare, but he needs immigration reform, and he needs gun control, he needs environment, and he needs to figure out infrastructure. And that's only going to happen if he engages with the Republican Party by doing exactly what he did. He's like, this is my mandate, and going after them and making sure that he's, he channels a little bit of LBJ and then what he does so well. So hand-to-hand combat in Congress, but then going to their districts and talking to the American people. So he needs to do a little bit of both.
But to make one point about this question of bigger wins, I mean, one thing I think you're seeing, I don't agree that Mitch McConnell does not believe he can't filibuster 3 judges at one time.
Really?
He's been filibustering dozens of people at any given time. So
he's like, okay, I'm here.
I think he'll be fine with that. What is really important about the D.C. Circuit Court is it deals with all the bulk of regulatory action. And one thing in a Congress that Obama can't work with that effectively, because Republicans will filibuster or vote down what he does, is that he does turn to some degree to regulatory action. And the big place he's going to do this year is climate change. The EPA is going to come out with a series of rules regulating power plants, possibly regulating coal. There's going to be some really big aggressive efforts that have been previewed for a long time now. And one of the big questions is, do they make it through the courts? Now, if you put 3 Democratic Obama appointees on the courts, that makes it much likelier you can get through. Obviously, Obama isn't on the ballot again. The Democrats are in 2014, but he's not. So in terms of wins, it's not just about popular ones. It's about actually affecting, say, the heating of the earth over time. And so one thing about the D.C. Circuit Court here...
Wow. I want to pause on that. You're like, there's politics, and then there's impacting the
and then there's destroying the planet. And one thing here, in terms of big wins, what they are potentially trying to create a pathway for here is actually doing something very big on climate change. And that would be, if they could get that done, a hugely important policy thing, even if it didn't go to Congress.
I would just like to add that I think that Obama will come back with a threat to get the Senate to change the filibuster rules. If they do go and filibuster all 3 of them, the Republicans in the Senate, I would be surprised if they did. But of course, they do need to vet them. There have been mistakes in the past on the Republican side and the Democratic side with judges that have been put forward that were not appropriate, and then issues came out and they withdrew. So they need to have a close look at them, but I would be surprised that there would be a move to try to filibuster all 3 of them and then risk having the rules changed on them.
I mean, vetting is appropriate. It's constitutional. But when we're starting to see the filibusters and when they are coming sort of across from low-level administrative appointees all the way up to the federal bench, then we know something else is going on. Also, my favorite swagger move in terms of nominations this week is coming up. 2 bold choices. I can't even believe they're back on the scene. Love it. My favorite presidential swagger moment of the week, this press conference on Wednesday when President Obama nominated Susan Rice to replace the departing Tom Donilon as National Security Advisor. Republicans tried to make Rice radioactive after placing blame for bungling the media response to Benghazi attacks squarely on her doorstep. Watching Rice accept the president's NSA nomination, it was easy to think that in removing herself from consideration for Secretary of State, she actually ended up exactly where she and the president had always hoped she would be. And just to up the ante of swagger on Wednesday, the president nominated Samantha Power to the UN ambassador position. Power is a Pulitzer Prize winner, but may be better known for her comments in an interview in 2008 when she was advisor to the Obama campaign. Yeah, you remember when she called then-Senator Hillary Clinton a monster. Gangsta. The president's decision to embrace both Rice and Power was a serious in-your-face defiance move. Clearly, he's refusing to let his political opponents have final say over who is and is not serving in his administration. And ladies, take note. This is yet another piece of evidence that demonstrates good girls make friends, but fearless women make history. All right. I can't believe Samantha Power and Susan Rice are back. That was a little intense this week. Yes? No? Am I making that up? That was a lot?
No, I think the fact that they are both in such positions to actually change the course of our human rights initiative and actually put it to the top of the agenda, of the American agenda, I think is incredible. And I think it goes back to, Ezra, what you were saying earlier, is that he is planting long seed possibilities so that his legacy is seen not in immediate time, but in 10, 15, 20 years from now. And that's what's incredible about what he's been doing the last week or so.
It also does respond back, Anthea, to your point about there had been some critique. I mean, there was that one picture where Valerie Jarrett's leg was in the picture of the New York Times with a female advisor around him. And he picks not just women, but like badass women, like strong women.
Exactly,
right?
Strong women. And I think that really sends out a message, because part of what happened is when Susan Rice and the Benghazi thing happened, they really tried to vilify her. But now by bringing her back for NSA and for Powers for the UN, what this is I am not afraid of strong women. I'm not afraid to appoint them to this, and you all are just going to have to deal with it. And I think the second thing is, since for a lot of people who are watching the administration now, is that this is the long-term thing, is that we need more women in these higher level positions of authority and power so that the tenor and tone of things can change. It will be very different to have a woman as the NSA chief as opposed to having a man. I think that will be the case. Same thing at the UN. All of these kinds of changes that he's making are making a different kind of inroad and a different kind of way to see this. And Republicans have to step up for this too. I mean, it's just, this is a fact. They really don't have that kind of depth on their side for women who are able to be appointed to these kinds of positions.
Well, I mean, it is true. The first black woman NSA, of course, was the other Rice. No relation, right? But there is something to be said. Not that we want to essentialize women. I mean, Michelle Bachmann is not Susan Rice, for example, right? But on the other hand, seeing Senator Gillibrand this week talking about sexual assault was indicative, was a reminder. I just want to listen for a moment to another woman who really made her voice heard this week.
While you are all so dedicated and determined, not all commanders are objective. Not every single commander necessarily wants women in the force. Not every single commander believes what a sexual assault is. Not every single commander can distinguish between a slap on the ass and a rape, because they merge all of these crimes together.
So we got, I mean, here on this question of military, of chain of command, of sexual assault, all of a sudden you have a woman's voice like the senators, and it reveals kind of what happens when you don't have a woman senator in that space.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very pleased to see women coming out, strong women. And I'm very impressed by Power going to the UN. I mean, she has a strong background on LGBT rights, on women's rights, on freedom of religion, and also reworking the UN. I think she's looked at it very closely.
I mean, one might argue that the monster comment is indicative that she won't make a good diplomat, right, just because it wasn't a very diplomatic moment. But her stepping down from the campaign at that time, when she was such a skilled and talented person, was, I think, difficult for a lot of folks. And it was stunning to see him stand there, the president, with both of those women this week.
And one thing I think is interesting about this is compare this to his national security and foreign policy team when he came into office. I mean, back then you had a set of things happening, right? First, a democratic sort of insecurity around national security, and also the fact that he didn't feel, or his campaign folks didn't feel, that he was totally credible on the issue. So in came Gates, right? They had a Bush holdover there. They brought in Hillary Clinton for a team of rivals, saying you had a set of folks there who were not necessarily Obama's people. What is really notable, I think, about the team he's assembling in his second term these are his people, even the people that Republicans and maybe even some other Democrats don't like that he has around him. But this is in a very, very, very significant way his team. It's Kerry, who was a very early endorser for him back in 2008. It's Hagel, of course, who was very close to in the Senate. It's Rice. It's Powers. I mean, this is Obama creating the Obama National Security
He's
team.
a little more settled into himself.
And doesn't feel that he needs to appoint people who are proving anything about him. He's now appointing people who essentially he wants to be there.
Well, it is true that, of course, in West Wing, in the second term, Bartlett takes C.J. Craig. Yeah, okay, sorry. I love West Wing. But up next.
Streaming on Netflix.
Streaming on Netflix. Near you. That's right. Don't watch TV on streaming. Watch it on TV. The First Lady is next. She got a little swagger of her own.
Makes me that much wiser.
Week without mentioning this. First Lady Michelle Obama at a private fundraiser on Tuesday dealing with protester Ellen Sturtz from the LGBT equality group Get Equal.
Right now, today, we have an obligation to stand up for those kids. And I don't care what you believe in. We don't. Wait. One of the things that I don't do well is this.
So if you don't think that sounded too swaggerish on the First Lady's part, consider that she then came down to speak with Ms. Sturtz, who was demanding that the president sign an executive order prohibiting federal contractors from discriminating against LGBT employees. Sturtz and Get Equal later said taken aback by the First Lady's response. Now, Anthea, you wrote about this week. I want to start by saying, of course I support and have said repeatedly that marriage is such a small part of an LGBT agenda. We must have this sort of law. But on the other hand, I appreciated how my First Lady managed the heckling.
Exactly. And I want to say the same thing, too. I mean, I support ENDA, but I do not support heckling the First Lady out of turn at a place that it didn't belong, in a private home with a lesbian couple there hosting. I mean, it just was really, as I'd like to call it, out of pocket and very disrespectful. I think for me, the moment where I realized it made a turn when she said I was taken aback. And I'm like, you have sort of made the First Lady as though she's not a real person who can feel, who has feelings, who would, come down to you and speak to you one-on-one. And I think what she did was absolutely right. But the whole thing that fell out afterwards was that people, all the reactions on Twitter, I mean, everybody just had a psychic meltdown, right?
Right.
Because we're all like, you go, right? Yep. You go, you do this. But at the same time, there were others who said, oh, no, she was absolutely right to heckle.
But this is the danger, I think, that has always been the pleasure and the pushback of having an African-American First Lady, is a recognition of what the stereotypes are that exist for black women, such that at all moments we appreciate the way that she is navigating this space of being First Lady in this entirely unique body, but we also know that at any moment she can be relabeled Sapphire, she can be relabeled Angry Black Woman, and so we both want her to do what all of our mamas would do, which is to say, I know you did not interrupt me. We can talk, but not right now. But on the other hand, we also know that the risks for her, and therefore for all of us that stand in that moment, are quite different, I think, than they are for any other First Lady.
I mean, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. You know, what is that perception? But I think the way that she handled it, and she always handles this stuff with grace every single time. And what did the heckler expect to happen?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's like you wanted to continue. You wanted her to continue talking while you were heckling her. Like, no, she provided the space that you were asking for, and then you didn't want to feel that vacuum. Well, then of course you're going to be dressed down and embarrassed. But you should have been in the first place when you're actually. And it's not that she's African American, but she's the First Lady.
Yeah. I also want to say, Get Equal did give us a statement when we told them that we were going to be talking about this, and they said Get Equal has engaged President Obama and his administration in many ways over several years about taking swift action to help end LGBT workplace discrimination. An executive order signed by the president will help low-income LGBT people find jobs and provide for our families in this recovering economy, and was promised us 5 years ago. We deeply respect the First Lady as a powerful political leader in our country and came to her this week to ask for help. Again, I am a huge supporter of this policy, but I'll also say that the angst about building coalitions between racialized communities and LGBT communities at a moment when many African Americans did their part this time, came out from the NAACP, the president coming out on marriage equality, did their part in 2012. It's got to be a two-way street on that building.
You know, and what's a little strange is that this was a private setting in a private home. Yeah. So the heckler actually had a chance, an opportunity to have spoken to her without creating this chaos. And I think that's where I think a lot of folks don't understand. It's like you actually were in a private home in a quiet setting that you could have actually corralled her if you wanted to.
I think the heckling happened out of desperation. There are a lot of issues in the LGBT community. You know, they've got INDA that they're trying to get passed. This executive order would help them a little bit. Moving in the right direction. Of course, we've got Defense Against Marriage Act that we're working on. And then they had some successes early on in the Obama administration when Don't Ask, Don't Tell being repealed. But also, I think maybe the First Lady's positioned herself to run for office.
Oh,
perhaps.
See,
that
would even on that, because I would eat that with a spoon and ice cream. I would love that. She has repeatedly said that she is not interested, but maybe, and that would be all kinds of swaggerific. Thank you to Ezra Klein, to Professor Anthea Butler, and to Edwina Rogers. I hope you will all come back and hang out with me again soon. Maria is staying for more. Coming up, the man playing ostrich to the